The little girl in this case, his sister, said at one point that she was taken outside. She told her mother the night people came and took her outside, and they were holding a little boy from the neighborhood out there. This was at night. And she said it's little Sammy, or whatever his name is, who lives down the block, who was also 4 or 5. She said they were holding him and they were sticking something sharp up his nose, and he was crying. Now, we know about nasal implants, and we know how many cases we hear of this. I have a case from Long Island where a woman was in her kitchen and her child, who was 2 and a half, was playing in her room, and she heard blood-curdling screams and ran into that room, and there was the little girl. She's inconsolable, and she finally calmed her down, and the little girl was able to say in 2.5-year-old language that funny boys, bad boys, had come in and had held her and had stuck something sharp up her nose and had hurt her. In the case of Dr. John Mack, a colleague of mine who was a psychiatrist in the Boston area, the family he's working with, a little girl went into her parents' room, woke them up, and she said her little brother, who was about 2.5 or 3, was bleeding, and they ran into the room, and there was blood coming from his nostril and all over the place. The child was sound asleep and with a smile on his face, peaceful. And they woke him up, and he said, and I've recently spoken to that child's mother, that the monster had come in with the funny eyes and had stuck something sharp or bitten him or whatever the term was a little change from just sticking something up his nose, but had done something up his nose, and that's why he was bleeding. So we have, of course, over and over and over again, nasal implant accounts from books written up by and about adults. But these are very pure childish accounts by little people who have not read the books and have not sat up and watched Stan Friedman on Nightline or something of that sort. This is something that they are just getting from their own experience, period. Now I'm going to come back to this family because I saw the little boy who made that previous drawing. I saw him a couple of years after he made that drawing. And he made this drawing for me. I said, would you please make a drawing for me of the night people? So he sat down and made this. First he made a head, and then he made the eyes, and then he made the teeth, like sharp teeth. And then he started on this wild hair. And what he came up with was a fairly aggressive-looking drawing. Now, I, as an artist, used to looking at the kind of emotion that certain kinds of lines and choices of color convey. And I wanted to see what the bottom line was, what this child's normal drawing style was. So I said, would you please draw me now a picture of your little sister? So this is what he drew. And incidentally, the thing sticking up in the middle of her head is her ponytail, because it's a little hard to... Now, a little difficult to see this together, but it's interesting comparatively. The normal human, his little sister, is small and sweet. Her arms are down, and she has a very sweet, lovely little smile. The alien night person, he calls it, is rather fierce and aggressive. His arms are reaching out, the hair reaches out. He's, in a sense, invading the space around him, whereas the little girl seems to be very content within her space. She's not, in any sense, at odds with what's around her, which I think says a great deal about the attitude here. Now, let me read you the kind of thing I get from adults. We'll go on here because there's a lot of material. This is the kind of thing you get. Now again, this happens to come from New Zealand, and I just mentioned that I got a very touching account of a child abduction from the little boy's father, and this incident took place in Guyana. Just received that last week. So these are worldwide. This woman writes from New Zealand, I feel the need to put down on paper an incident that occurred to my youngest son, Billy, earlier this year. First of all, I'll tell you about our family so you have a picture in your head. We're an average New Zealand family, very close. My husband and I have 2 sons, 11 and 8. She describes how they work, what they do. Billy is a nervous child who has long had a fear of being alone. He has an exterior of being a real man's man, but he is soft as a marshmallow inside, with a low self-esteem which are constantly trying to build up. Late in January this year, I was awakened by Billy calling out to me. He sleeps in the next room. He screamed, "Mom, there's two aliens staring at me." Normally, if ever the boys need me in the night, my feet are on the ground before I'm awake. But despite the terror in his voice, I called out to him that it was only a dream and to go back to sleep. Now, it's a classic case of some kind of exterior control which separates the parents, switches them off, renders them useless in effect, and so that the child can be taken if that's in fact what happened. But she is aware of how odd her behavior was. And for those of us who have children, as I have, and I know most of you and many of you in this audience do, if some child is screaming a thing like that, would you ever imagine, just go back to sleep, Sonny, you're having a dream, that you wouldn't get out of bed to look? She said about an hour later, I heard him crying, and this time I went into him. He was sitting up in bed. I cuddled him, and he told me two aliens, his words, were standing by his bed staring at him. They didn't speak, they just stood there. There was a light behind them, so their faces were in shadow. One was taller than the other, and they didn't move. They just stared for ages. He was too terrified to move, he said. After a while, they turned and walked away, and then he cried for me. Normally, I would put it down to a bad dream, except for his behavior the next day. He was tired the first thing, and as I dropped him off at my sister's for 2 hours, while I took his brother to an appointment, I thought he'd play quietly or watch TV. However, by the time I got back to him, he was lying on the floor crying, with a bad headache, which had only been mild earlier on. Also, he seemed to have a sore groin. He told my sister about the two aliens in his bedroom, drawing a picture and insisting they were real. It was not a dream. All that day he was listless and weepy. I've never seen Billy listless and weepy like that, even when he's sick. Occasionally he still mentions the aliens and maintains they were real. His fear of being alone now is worse. Once it was just that he was afraid of being alone in the car. He wouldn't stay in the car alone, even if I was popping into the dairy to get milk. But now he must know where I am all the time in the house. And if he's, say, watching TV, he'll check every 10 minutes or so to make sure I'm still there. On rereading the last paragraph, it makes Billy sound like a neurotic kid. He's not. It's just his one fear. He's outgoing, friendly, and lovable. I don't know why I'm writing to you such a jumbled letter, except the need to put this in writing. I have an awful urge to bury it all in my mind and try to forget it happened. But I want to protect Billy somehow, and I feel so helpless. Now, this is, of course, so typical. And in order to try to help parents, in order to have some way of eliciting these accounts, because you obviously can't go to a child and ask questions out of the blue about a traumatic experience that had better be left buried, actually, at that point, rather than bringing it up. Unless you're prepared to do something which might somehow alleviate the child's fears, allow him to talk about it without underlining the situation or focusing upon it. And that's why I've developed a projective test. I'll show you this one last drawing by another little boy who's been through these experiences. A wonderful drawing of an alien, and I think the most touching thing is he has coming out of the alien's mouth these words, "If only I had a friend." It's very odd how children seem to have picked up on the sense of the alien's let's say sadness, loneliness, yearning for the richness of the human condition, of the human experience. I've said over and over again that they are learning from us. We have so much to give them that they need, but we'll talk about that in a moment. Now, this is the ultimate alien, I guess. One of the things that I decided to do was to design a projective test. And Sal Amendola did the drawings for me. He's a cartoonist. He actually worked on the Batman strip for a while. And what I said was I want 10 coloring book style, neutral kinds of drawings of familiar images. And this is what we do. It's an image recognition test. I will take these 10 cards to a child, and we will play games. And I love to play with kids anyway, so we usually get going in all kinds of stuff. Sometimes I've even forgotten to do the test. I was having such a good time. But you play with the child, and then at a certain point, I'll say, "Hey, I've got a game here. See if you know who or what these are." So it becomes a big challenge. So we do that. We tried to design this so that it was a little racially ambiguous. We wanted as wide a range of things as we could get. We didn't want to scare anybody. But this leads into the Halloween thing. The very last is this. And what I was interested was to see whether children would be able to differentiate between a skull with big black eyes and our little friend back here. Now, in the case of one of the tests, there's a little girl who talked to me about Kevin. She first had been absolutely terrified about this man that came into her room. She took her up into the sky. She said, "They take me to see the doctor. They hurt me. They put," and so forth. It was a very, very sad business. She was extremely terrified. Then she turned it, as some of these children will do, they'll turn it around into, "He's my best friend. It's wonderful. This is a combination of, I believe, of the great human ability to rebound from trauma and fear and to try to make something out of it. Think of all the Vietnam vets who have gone through a horrible experience but nevertheless have learned and grown from the experience and turned it into something that in an emotional inner way is positive for them. I see this all the time with abductees. And it's a very interesting thing. I think people who've had abduction experiences for the most part have been enriched on some level and have grown and developed, just as I think people who've survived the Vietnam War have been enriched and have grown and developed as a result. And yet, I have never met an abductee nor a Vietnam vet who, when I asked, "Would you want your child to go through these experiences?" would ever say yes. Now, this little girl, when I first met her, one that I was referring to, calls the person who comes in her room and takes her, calls him Kevin. And when I showed her these cards, she immediately said, "That's Kevin." And her little sister, who her mother thought was completely free, had said, "Mommy, I saw Kevin last night. He was in the room." And the older sister and Kevin, she said, "They floated right through the wall." And she said, "I can't float, so I don't go with them." And when I took this to show the little girl going through this whole routine, she immediately said, "That's Kevin who's in there, who's my sister's friend." This is what Amy said when she was 6 years old. She said, "Kevin is my best friend. He loves me. He has big black eyes and no hair. He takes me in his ship, and there are bad Kevins there that hurt me. They made a boo-boo on my tummy. Kevin took my mommy, too. She was asleep, but he woke her up, and we went up into his ship. He didn't wake up Daddy. Kevin has magic. He helps me fly out the window to his ship. Mommy went with us." And then listen to this, a 6-year-old child. "There was a nurse in his ship. She had a little baby, and she let me hold it. It was light. It was a girl, and she had gray hair. The nurse told me I'd have to give her back when I went home. The baby didn't cry while I held her. The nurse was small like Kevin. She was all in white. Sometimes I'm scared when Kevin comes." I asked this little girl if she'd ever held a real baby outside of this, and she said no, she hadn't. Of course, parents again, all those of you out there are not in the habit of handing a baby to a 6-year-old child to hold. But at any rate, the baby, she said, did not squirm around, didn't wiggle, and didn't cry. She just held it. And all the time she was holding the baby, her mom was on the table and didn't have any clothes on, she told me, and things were happening to her mother. At any rate, this little figure can elicit all kinds of things when you suddenly come upon it. Now, what I generally do is I tell the child if they like this the best, they usually do. They love the Ninja Turtle. I say at the end of all this, after we've gotten any kind of conscious and unconscious responses from the child, or at least, let's say, subliminal responses, body language, just looking at the pictures. Afterwards, I'll say, "Now this is the best part of this game." I said, "We're going to take this card," and I'll send this picture, and I'll say, "You're going to make up a story. And I want any story you can make up. You must make up really terrific stories. And this can be a silly story, or a scary story, or a funny story. It can be any story. But you're going to make up a story. He comes into your room. Now, what does he say to you? And what do you say to him? And what happens?" And then we go through the story, of course, and then we go to this one. And I was working with a family. The mother was a psychiatrist, and her little 3.5-year-old had been talking about these experiences. And when we hit this one, and she went through them like this: Batman, clown, turtle, little girl, policeman. He's the man that comes in, and we went out the window, and we went up in the light, and Mommy was up there, and Mommy was on the table, and Mommy was crying or something, whatever it was. And the mother is sitting there horrified, not knowing, obviously, that this had happened to her. But then the child went on to the other stories immediately afterwards. It's a wonderful way of eliciting some kind of recollection. And one of the interesting things about it was, in one case, I got fooled by forgetting how wonderfully literal kids can be. I said, "Do you know who or what these people are?" That's the way I introduced it. Got to this one, the child said no, she didn't know. Later on, I asked, "Did you dream about any of these people?" She said, "Him." And I said, "What happened in the dream?" And she said, "Well, he came in my room in the dream, and he had a knife, and he cut me with it." And I said, "What kind of knife?" I said, "They're long, thin knives that you cut meat with, and a little pointy knife." She said, "A little pointy knife." And I said, "Where did he poke you with it?" She said, "In my belly button." And at this point, the child had been to 6 doctors just in the past week because of this enormous rash of like water blisters around her navel, which had all burst, and she had scabs. There was no pain, there was no itching, there didn't seem to be any scarring, there didn't seem to be any after effect. It was just horrible to look upon, but there didn't seem to be any kind of immediate other problem. But this had happened just after this particular dream about this little person. But at any rate, to go through this, very often when we get to this, the child says either that's a skeleton. They never sort of mix it up. They know there's a difference. There's no connection whatsoever. They know exactly what they're looking at. But at any rate, the little girl who, when we were dealing with that figure that she said she didn't know who or what it was, and she said she had dreamed about it, I realized that she was saying to me, "I don't know who or what that is." She simply didn't know. It was a kind of a literal reaction. It wasn't that it was a strange thing to her. She had experienced its presence many times. And I was always reminded about something I know every one of the audience has had as an experience. You call a friend, and the little child at your friend's house answers and says hello, and you say, "Is your mommy there?" And the child says, "Yes." And then you say, "Could I talk to your mommy?" Children tend to go in a certain kind of literal way, and I didn't ask the right question. Anyway, just to get back to one other aspect of this, this is the father's leg on the right and his son's little boy, I believe in the age range of about 5, but I may be off by a year or so. This is a scoop mark similar to that on his father's leg, which just turned up more or less overnight. The father had taken the little boy to a dermatologist because of a strange rash that he had. The dermatologist had examined him, given him some salve for the rash. He came back 3 or 4 days later. The rash had cleared up, but a little hard to see, I'm sorry, it's a dark slide. But all of a sudden, this wound was there, and it had completely healed, and it hadn't been there 4 days earlier. And the doctor was quite astonished about it. But of course, this is another physical dimension of this whole abduction phenomenon. Now, mind you, if abductions begin in childhood, as I believe they do, and my guess is that the vast majority begin in the first year of life. That's a guess, but I believe it's probably going to turn out to be accurate. That means that if somebody reaches the age of 25, they may have had numerous experiences, and they may remember pieces of 1 or 2 of them. So the whole thing remains a buried phenomenon. I don't think that this little boy probably remembers much about it. I'm showing this by comparison to an adult scoop mark. This is Kathy Davis' mother. And incidentally, the young woman I dealt with this afternoon who had the experience with the cat, she has a small mark rather similar to this on her ankle that more or less was discovered by accident with no apparent recollection of how it came there. This is another scoop mark that was in the process of healing. Usually these things heal very, very quickly. This one took a little longer. Can we have the lights back on? Now, the basic point with these experiences with children is we have the abduction phenomenon raw. We have it clean. We have it very, very clear cut. It is not overlaid with the two basic human needs that we all have, which is to translate everything into gods or devils. Everything has to be somehow here to help us or here to do us in. And I have lived a lot of years doing research, trying to follow the data as clearly as possible and not falling into traps of trying to decide who or what the aliens are, where they come from, any of those things. People talk very coolly and blithely about the Pleiadians here and the Reticulans here and so forth and so on. Nobody has the slightest real idea or any kind of strong evidence about the origin of the phenomenon, nor do we know what will ultimately come of it. In the short term, there is absolutely no doubt that they, whoever they are, have an agenda, and that agenda seems to be to take sperm, ova, physical properties of human beings for their own purposes, which seem to be some kind of reproductive experiment involving hybridization and who knows what else. But beyond that, a strong interest in trying to absorb and learn something about human emotions, human diversity. I think they are fantastically interested in even a simple thing as how we love our own children, our own kind. There's something immensely touching to me about the fact that there are so many presentation scenes described in these UFO abduction experiences where a small baby is handed, in the case I described, to a little girl to hold. There's something that they want to understand that we have that they don't seem to have. I think that in a way they're hungry for humanity. They're desperate for what we have that they seem to lack. What they have, of course, is a technology which is infinitely beyond anything we could imagine. But they seem to have bypassed the simple human richness that everyone here in this room has experienced in all of his or her years. It's something that they need and desire. Now, one of the most touching children's cases, I think, illustrates something in a very direct way. A woman on the Cape I've worked with, Cape Cod, has a family. Many of them have had these UFO experiences. I believe she has 5 children. But the little girl who was about 5 years old in her family she's described over and over again being taken out of the room by these little people, etc. Sometimes it's nice, and sometimes she's scared to death, and it's a mix, as it always is. But she described a little man coming in with big eyes, and he took her out, but he had a little girl with him. And the little girl was funny looking. She had blonde hair, and she had big eyes and a big head, but she didn't look like him. And he said, "We have to go. There are friends waiting." So he took the little Cape Cod girl and this very odd little, I believe, hybrid child, for want of a better term, I'll call her that. And they went to a playground. And in the playground and this was nighttime, but she said they must have been playing baseball because all the lights were on. This is a baseball field with no lights. But at any rate, this is in the town of Dennis on Cape Cod. And there lined up were 9 more little children, weird children, as the other child might say. She said they don't smile and they look exactly alike. She said they're all twins, the way she put it. And they're all wearing the same little white jumpsuits. And the man told her, the little Cape Cod girl, that she was to ride on the swings and the slides and show the children how to play. So she went up and down the slides and swings. She went back and forth, the seesaw and everything, getting more and more upset because she wanted the children to play with her. She's a human being. She's gregarious. She has all these wonderful qualities that we own, that are ours. But the children just stared at her. She said they didn't smile, they didn't say anything, they just looked. And over again she had to ride the slides and swings. Now I think that there's something immensely touching about this. The little boy who made the drawing and had the alien saying, "If only I had a friend." What comes out of these cases seems to be a strange detachment, an emotionless world that seems to be hungry for the richness and diversity of human life. And though some people have said they're here to help us, I think there's no evidence that they're here to help us or to harm us, but I think they're here to get what we have in abundance. And in a strange way, I end up being as optimistic as it is possible to be, granted the bad side effects that these events are causing in people's lives. I hope for some kind of ultimately optimistic ending to this whole strange phenomenon as it's affected so many people around the world. Thank you.
Implants that have been recovered and perhaps examined and analyzed?
The question was about the status of implant investigation right now. There are, I believe, 5 objects, alleged objects, that are being studied from 5 different individuals, different parts of the body. They're being taken extraordinarily seriously, and they are being looked at by major people. But this is the problem right now. To prove a negative, to prove that this thing, this strange little thing with odd attributes, is impossible to have originated, it's impossible for it to have originated on Earth, is a very hard thing to prove. No scientist who is a full professor somewhere is going to come out and say, ladies and gentlemen, this could not be made on Earth. This is an alien implant. It would, no one is going to do that lightly, let's put it that way. And no one is yet ready to make that kind of announcement. I don't want to make any large claims. I'm not that kind of scientist at all. I don't know the people who are working on this. I have enormous confidence in. Truly, these objects are anomalous, peculiar. They don't make sense being found where they were when certain things are found in very odd places in the human body. Just the fact that there was something physical that turned up there is already a weird situation. But it's something which, of course, is filled with hope, I believe, as an area of research. But we can't really say too much more than that. You have a question?
What do you tell the children that you feel you need to tell them?
The question about reassuring children what to say, this is one of the most central problems that I've run into over and over again. I think that people, just to start with, people have to realize that being in the position I'm in with 2 books that are still in print with the address in the back, the Intruders Foundation and so on, that I'm getting still at least 2 new probable abduction cases every single day. On a certain day when the mail comes in a clutch, I might get 10 new cases in a day. The amount of data, one of the reasons I was sharing those letters, both those letters arrived in the past 4 or 5 days, something like that. The reason I was sharing that is just to give you a sense of the amount of data that has to be dealt with. One has to come up with things that can be helpful because there are desperate parents very, very often on the other end of the telephone or in the letters. Now, I had 2 major psychiatrists who are extremely interested in this visiting me, and they were dealing with a woman who was talking about what was happening to her son. And she said, I told him it wasn't real, I would have helped you, you must have had a nightmare. And both psychiatrists said, no, you must not tell the child it was a nightmare if the child does not think it was a nightmare. If the child calls it a nightmare, you can call it a nightmare. If the child says it was real, you say it was real. Because the one thing you can't do is separate yourself from the child. The child needs you to be on his or her side. The child desperately needs somebody to accept what's telling or she's telling. So the first point is to use the child's language, to agree with it, to accept it. And then both psychiatrists said, I thought, a remarkable thing. They said, you must say to the child, there are lots of things in this world which we don't understand. There are lots of times when your mom and dad are going to have trouble protecting you from everything. The world is full of complicated things, some of which are good and some of which are bad and some of which are hurtful and some of which are nice. But the main thing is we're all here together. We love you. We're doing everything we can to protect you, and we want you to talk to us whenever you feel these things, but not to claim omnipotence. You're not to claim that you will stop this from happening. You'll protect the child. And then immediately to get the child to make drawings, to get that sense of control. Now, one psychiatrist who's part of my network has developed the puppet therapy that's used in incest cases and child abuse cases and so on, sexual abuse cases. He's using it in these cases, and of course there are a lot of analogies here. But it's interesting that when he worked with this little girl, and she took different puppets played different parts, and he had them, the alien puppets or whatever she called the people with the funny eyes. They put the little girl puppet down, and they started doing something to her stomach and so forth. And then he said, he picked everything up. He said, now what would the little girl here, what would she do with the people with the funny eyes? And she started smashing the other puppet with all of her strength. And he said he had to distract her by saying, let's go get a Coke and so forth. But the anger and the fear and everything that welled up in this little child was amazing. But puppet therapy is useful. I think that the book has to be written on this. And it's one of the major issues. And of course, if the child is lucky enough to have parents who will accept the reality of these experiences, that's at least 3/4 of the battle right there. I don't know whether what I'm saying is helpful enough, but it's important.
So why do abductions seem to run in families?
Why do abductions run in families? This, I think, again, has to do with the genetic curiosity and focus of the abduction experience. In other words, I think they're following bloodlines, and that's why, even to the sense that you almost get the feeling that there's a control, that they'll take a woman and they'll take 2 of her children and leave 2 of her other children alone, as if there's some kind of, I don't know, control. Who knows? We really can't answer a question like that, but it certainly is true. It's one of the things that I discovered and wrote about in Intruders, and also hinted at it in Missing Time. But it's one of those things that has been certainly replicated by other investigators around the world. Question?
But right now, mutilated and missing cats are a major problem in Plano, Texas, which is a suburb north of Dallas. It's a upper class, basically, community. And I talked with the lieutenant. Well, he's actually in the police department last week. They now have over 100 cases, and he is completely and totally baffled. And I will talk more about that tomorrow, but I'm really glad you brought up that case.
You know, for those who didn't hear, Lindy was talking about Plano, Texas, the town where missing cats are numbering over 100 now. This is a very wild question.
Yes, on the issue of the implants. On the issue of the
Yes.
implants. Is there a particular place where the implants are discovered, and are they discovered, are they retrievable, and what is your speculation as to their purpose?
Well, 2 implants they've come from different places. Some have come from lower areas of the body. There were 2 which were on the other side of the penis. There are several cases of what we suspect are scrotal implants, which have not yet been retrieved, but are clearly there, but they may turn out to be something different. Of course, the nasal implant thing is very, very common. But the point is they're in places where there shouldn't be anything. Oh, let me just mention about the penile implant. There's a recent case that a colleague of mine was working on, where a woman was driving to work in, I believe, Massachusetts, to the hospital where she was a nurse. When she got there were a couple of nurses who were associates of hers who were very upset. They had been outside, and they had seen this enormous object right over the hospital with lights on it. Now, the woman driving in had seen this same thing, apparently, or something very similar to it, so they were comparing notes. But when the 2 nurses went back to work, they had gone outside to have a cigarette, because I understand they don't allow smoking in hospitals. It's supposed to be a joke. I'm sorry. It's a very lame joke. But at any rate, when the 2 nurses went back to work, they were in a ward with completely comatose patients. And when they had to do certain procedures with these patients, one of the nurses discovered that a male patient had an 1.5 inch long slit on the underside of his penis. And another woman had an incision in her abdomen. These were totally comatose people. And how something like this could happen, I don't know whether that would imply an implant of some sort. But these are people who perhaps will never recover from their comas. It's a very odd business. But maybe we'll take another question. Then. One more question? Who performs hypnosis? Well, we've got dozens and dozens and dozens of people now, thank goodness, doing it here and there in different countries. I've been at this for going on 17 years, and for the first 8 years, I had numerous different people doing it for me, psychiatrists, psychologists. I had dinner with, just the other night, with one who's done a great deal of hypnosis for me. Then I started doing it myself, and I've been doing it in many, many cases since 1983. Yes. And I also have had 5 psychiatrists come to me to have me hypnotize them because of their experiences. Okay, thank you very much.
12. NASA says that it has found some planets here outside of our solar system. These so-called exoplanets were discovered in just 1 week. NASA believes at least 2 of them are comparable to Neptune, which is about 14 times the size of the planet Earth.
Queen Latifah is keeping busy. She's